The moment before you speak, the verdict is already in, not forming, in. Neurologists at Princeton measured exactly how long it takes the human brain to generate a confident social evaluation of another person. 39 milliseconds, not 7 seconds. 39 milliseconds, the span of half a blink. And that verdict, assembled entirely from visual data before a single word is exchanged, carries a documented cognitive bias. The brain will spend the next several minutes, sometimes hours, quietly enforcing. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that men judge far more by their eyes than by their hands. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing the foundational operating system of human social cognition. There exists a category of person who understands this at a mechanical level, who has treated their physical presentation not as an accessory to their power, but as the weapon itself, who has become so obsessively, so precisely, so addictively calibrated in what they project that the room adjusts before they've said a word. By the end of this, you will understand why Machiavelli considered the management of appearance not a vanity, a survival imperative. And you will understand the specific neurological mechanism that makes meticulously crafted people dangerous in ways the merely talented will never be. Before you open your mouth, the case is already closed. Let's start with the mechanism, cold, clinical, without the sentimentality that makes this truth comfortable to ignore. Your brain processes faces through two distinct pathways running simultaneously at radically different speeds. The fast pathway, the subcortical route, moves visual information through the amygdala and produces an emotional and social evaluation before the visual cortex has finished fully rendering the image. You're not experiencing intuition in those early moments. You are experiencing biology. The verdict produced there is automatic, unconscious, and stubbornly resistant to revision. Social psychologist Nalini Ambady and Robert Rosenthal designed what became known as the thin slicing experiments at Harvard in the 1990s. Subjects were shown silent video clips of university teachers, 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, then 6. They rated the teachers on competence, effectiveness, warmth. The evaluations from 6 seconds of silent footage correlated almost perfectly with ratings given by students who had attended those teachers' full semester courses. 300 hours of interaction did not meaningfully improve on 6 seconds of visual impression. Read that again slowly. The information contained in your appearance, your posture, your grooming, the way your body occupies space, that information is not a supplement to the impression you make. It is the impression. Everything that comes after, the handshake, the introduction, the well-constructed argument, is processed through a neural filter that already has its answer. That filter will find evidence to support it and quietly discard evidence that contradicts it. This is called confirmatory processing. Once the initial impression fires, the brain behaves less like an evaluator and more like a defense attorney for its own original verdict. Walk in precisely calibrated, composed, deliberate, visually coherent. The brain across from you flags your average moments as charming and your errors as forgivable. Walk in careless, disheveled, visually scattered. The same brain flags your brilliant moments as suspicious and your ordinary failures as damning. You are not being evaluated. You are being filtered through a decision that was made before you arrived. Machiavelli pointed at this in the discourses on Livy. A prince who holds himself with the visible architecture of power is harder to attack than a prince of equal ability who does not because power produces the appearance, because the appearance produces the experience of power, first in the observer, then in the room, then in the reality of what that room permits or denies. This is where most people stop reading. They understand the idea abstractly, nod at it, and continue grooming themselves at the level of basic decency. Basic decency neutralizes the negative response. It doesn't trigger the positive one, and between those two outcomes lives an enormous, measurable, real-world gap. Quick pause. If you've been watching Mindplicit for a while, you know I don't ask for much. But what I'm about to say matters. So listen for 30 seconds. YouTube demonetized this channel. The advertisers don't want this material reaching you. So everything I can't say here, the harder applications, the specific tactics, the breakdowns the algorithm punishes me for, that work lives on Patreon now. The members-only videos, the audio podcast, the full written scripts, the frameworks I can describe in public, but can't actually teach in public. It's $4.99 a month. Less than a coffee for the half of this channel YouTube won't let me publish. If the public videos have been valuable to you, the inside is where the work sharpens. Link is in the description and pinned in the comments. The doors open. Back to the video. The man who built a throne with a length of cloth. In 1794, a young man named George Beau Brummell arrived at Eton College with no title, no estate, no lineage worth speaking of. His father was a civil servant. His family's proximity to power was functional, not hereditary. By every measure of the rigid class architecture that governed Regency England, he was a man whose ceiling was already established. By 1800, he was the most socially powerful person in England who did not sit on a throne. Beau Brummell, as posterity named him, did not ascend through wealth or war or inheritance. He used one instrument, deployed with an obsession that his contemporaries documented with a mixture of fascination and genuine unease, the systematic, compulsive, daily management of his physical presentation. His morning routine was recorded across multiple first-hand accounts, a minimum of 2 hours, not for functional preparation, 2 hours spent in a process he called dress, which meant something different to him than it meant to anyone watching. He did not dress for warmth. He did not dress for occasion. He dressed to construct a visual argument so precise and so controlled that upon entering a room, the response of the room was not admiration. Admiration implies evaluation, implies a conscious decision that could go either way. The response was deference, automatic, involuntary. His cravat, the folded neckcloth that signaled refinement in that era, was tied and retied by hand, dozens of times, until the fold sat at the exact angle that communicated effortless mastery. Visitors allowed into his dressing room described piles of discarded linen on the floor. Failures, cloth rejected because the knot sat a fraction too low, or the fold was a degree too symmetrical, or the angle looked too deliberate rather than inevitably right. His valet, when asked about the discarded pile, reportedly responded, "Those are our failures, sir." He once told a visitor, "If John Bull turns to look at you in the street, you are not well dressed." This is not a statement about fashion, it is a statement about the target he was pursuing, not to be admired, not to be noticed, to be so precisely, faultlessly calibrated that no one could locate an imperfection in his presentation, and in the absence of that imperfection, the brain, defaulting to its own machinery, would generate the only available verdict: this man belongs above me. Brummell became intimate with the Prince of Wales, the future George IV, not because the prince outranked him, but because Brummell's presence was constructed with such visible self-mastery that proximity to him felt like elevation. This is a documented neurological phenomenon. When you stand near someone whose physical presentation signals absolute command of themselves, your brain reads their self-mastery as a signal of general mastery, and it attributes to you some reflection of that signal simply by association. His social power lasted nearly 2 decades, sustained entirely by cloth, posture, and obsessive physical calibration. When it collapsed, we will arrive there. It collapsed for exactly the reason Machiavelli predicted it would. The halo has nothing to do with heaven. In 1972, Karen Dion, Ellen Berscheid, and Elaine Wolster published a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. They gave subjects photographs of people varying in physical attractiveness and asked them to rate those people on a series of entirely unrelated traits: intelligence, professional success, likelihood of a successful marriage, quality of moral character. The subjects had never met these people. They had no information beyond the photograph. the physically attractive individuals received significantly higher ratings across every single dimension. Not just good-looking, smarter, more likely to succeed, better moral character, more trustworthy, more professionally competent. None of these attributes have a logical connection to physical appearance. The subjects understood this. They were educated adults who would have stated clearly, if asked, that a person's face says nothing about their ethics or their intelligence. And yet, the brain applied it anyway, automatically, below the threshold of conscious awareness. Dion, Beerscheid and Wolster named it the halo effect. The term itself was older. Psychologist Edward Thorndike had first identified it in 1920, noticing that military officers who rated subordinates highly on one trait tended to rate them highly across all traits. But the 1972 study was the first to show that physical appearance triggered the broadest, deepest, most automatic halo of all, not a specific attribute, a total atmospheric impression. Here is what the textbook version omits. The halo effect is not symmetrical. Its inverse, researchers call it the Horn effect, operates with equivalent force in the opposite direction. The person whose appearance signals carelessness, disorder, or neglect receives automatic negative attributions in the same unconscious process. Their ideas receive more skepticism. Their credentials get cross-examined harder. Their mistakes carry heavier penalties. The room imposes a cognitive tax on them for their visual failure, and then constructs entirely rational-sounding reasons for why the tax was warranted. You are paying or collecting one of these two tolls in every interaction you have. Every negotiation, every job interview, every pitch, every conversation where you want to be taken seriously. The toll is not levied consciously, cannot be appealed through argument, and cannot be waived by demonstrated competence, because demonstrated competence comes after the toll is set. What Machiavelli was pointing at when he wrote that the prince must be a great simulator, what he understood without having access to a single one of these studies, is that appearance is not the supplement to your power strategy. It is the gate through which every other strategy passes. Without a controlled, deliberate, commanding physical presentation, your brilliance is a weapon locked in an armory nobody was willing to enter. The price tag on your face. In 2011, economist Daniel Hammermesh published research that removed every last shred of sentimentality from this topic. He spent decades analyzing labor market data. The conclusion was not philosophical. It was a number. Individuals ranked in the top third of physical attractiveness earn, on average, 12% more annually than those ranked in the bottom third, with education, industry, experience, and socio-economic background held constant. Over a 40-year career, that premium compounds to roughly $230,000 in additional lifetime earnings, generated entirely by the halo effect of appearance. The premium doesn't stop at salary negotiations. Hammermesh and colleagues documented that attractive defendants receive shorter sentences in criminal proceedings. Attractive mortgage applicants receive more favorable loan terms. Attractive candidates receive more callbacks across industries, cultures, and continents. And the effect has been replicated in studies conducted in contexts as different as the German labor market and rural China. A study in applied financial economics found that CEOs rated as more physically imposing and presentable by independent evaluators presided over companies with measurably higher stock returns, not because attractive people are better strategists, but because the market, the board, the investors responded to their presence with automatic confidence signals that propagated through every downstream decision. The progressive response to this data is outrage at the unfairness of the system. The Machiavellian response is to recognize that the system operates on fixed rules, rules written into the human brain before language, before culture, before any system of fairness existed, and to engage with those rules with absolute, deliberate intention. The bias will not be reasoned out of existence. It will not cease functioning because you resent it. It is biological hardware with a 300-million-year operating history. What the data reveals is that physical presentation is somatic capital, not metaphorically, literally. Capital that can be invested in, cultivated, and compounded. Capital that generates returns before you've demonstrated a single other asset you possess. Capital that, uniquely among all the resources you could develop, begins paying dividends in the first 39 milliseconds of any interaction. Brummell understood this in 1800 without the economics research. He treated his morning ritual not as vanity. Vanity wants to be seen admiring itself. Brummell's obsession was colder than vanity. He treated his appearance as a financial instrument, an asset requiring daily meticulous management because its performance determined the leverage he would have in every room he entered that day. Most people still treat this capital as secondary. They invest years in credentials, decades in skill, and they assign their physical presentation the scattered, half-conscious attention of someone who believes the real work speaks for itself. It does not. The real work speaks through a filter. The filter was set before anyone listened. The contract nobody warned you about. Sociologist Erving Goffman spent years dissecting what he called the presentation of self in everyday life. His argument, developed in 1959, still largely ignored by the people who would benefit most from it, was that all social interaction is performance. Every person entering a social situation is staging a production, consciously or not. The dark implication: the audience cannot distinguish between sincere performance and calculated performance. They produce identical results. Authenticity, the thing modern culture has elevated to an almost sacred category, is, in terms of social outcome, functionally irrelevant. The impression generated is the reality experienced. Goffman identified two components in every social performance: the given, what you consciously communicate through your words, your stated ideas, your explicit choices, and the given off, the involuntary, ambient impression produced by your total physical presence, your grooming, your posture, the fit of what you're wearing, the way your body settles into space. Crucially, audiences trust the given off more than the given, because they have been lied to by words, endlessly. Words are cheap and manipulable, and everyone knows it. But the body, the grooming, the physical coherence, the deliberateness of your presentation feels harder to fake, and therefore more honest, more revealing, more diagnostic. This is the trap for the person who believes effort invested in words compensates for neglect in appearance. When your ambient physical signal broadcasts carelessness or disorder, no matter how precise your words are, the observer experiences cognitive dissonance. They don't consciously register it as a contradiction. They simply feel a vague unease, an instinct that something doesn't add up. They find reasons, invented, post hoc reasons, to withhold conviction. Your verbal performance is actively undermining itself because you left an ambient channel broadcasting a different message. Here is the principle underneath this. Every person who enters a social context without deliberate physical calibration has broken an unwritten contract. The contract is primal. I have invested effort in this interaction. I am signaling through every visible aspect of my physical self that I understand the value of this room and the time of the people in it, that they were worth preparing for. To break this contract is to signal contempt. Not intentional contempt. The neglect may be entirely unconscious, but the brain of the person across from you reads it as contempt regardless, because intention is invisible and the signal is not. The person who arrives visually disheveled is communicating at the ambient level: you did not warrant my preparation. And preparation, at a biological level, is how humans determine whether someone deserves their resources, their trust, their deference. Whether this person is signaling membership in the category of people worth taking seriously. This is why Machiavelli wrote with such sharp specificity about the prince who commands respect at a glance versus the prince who must argue for it. The one who argues for respect from a position of visual carelessness has already lost. Not because the argument is weak, the argument may be brilliant, but respect, like trust, is not extended after deliberation. It fires before deliberation begins, or it is withheld by default. The obsession standard, and why casual attention is worthless. Return to Brummell for a moment. The word his contemporaries used across multiple accounts independently was not stylish, not elegant, not well-dressed. The word was impeccable. Impeccable means without a flaw that can be found, not flawless by some objective standard that doesn't exist, calibrated to a level that removes every foothold for criticism. This is the specific standard that triggers the neurological effect, not attractiveness, not fashion, not the display of wealth, the removal of every visual element that allows the observer's brain to locate a flaw, and in the consequent absence of a flaw, the brain defaults automatically to its only remaining available attribution, authority. This is the specific threshold that separates casual attention to appearance from the level Machiavelli was pointing toward. Casual attention, basic hygiene, clean clothing, functional grooming, neutralizes the horn effect. It removes the negative attribution, but it does not trigger the positive halo. It produces a null signal, an absence of penalty, which is a very different thing from an active advantage. The positive halo, the one that generates the economic premium Hamermesh documented, the automatic trust transfer Goffman described, the authority signal that carried Brummell into rooms that should have been closed to him for life, requires something more demanding. It requires what I'll call the obsession standard. The obsession standard is a daily audit, not a check of whether you're presentable. A specific, deliberate interrogation of what every visible element of your physical presence is communicating, and whether that message is one you chose or one you defaulted into by carelessness. Consider posture. Not stand straight as a vague directive, the specific spatial message communicated by how you occupy the room. Closed posture, compressed, slightly forward, protective, broadcasts a signal your nervous system generates when it perceives threat. It tells every person within visual range that you are protecting yourself from something in this environment. Open, settled, occupying posture broadcasts the signal of someone who has never needed to guard against this room, because the room does not represent a threat level that concerns you, because you are the ambient threat level. Consider grooming, not cleanliness, which is the floor, not the ceiling. The specific refinement of hair, skin, hands, nails, the visible edge of your physical self, signals daily, intentional investment in the self. Research from the Journal of Applied Psychology consistently finds that groomed individuals receive significantly higher competence attributions independent of actual measured abilities. Your grooming is being read as a proxy for how you manage everything not visible. Every observer is asking unconsciously, does this person attend to detail? Do they maintain things? Can they be trusted with a responsibility they might not prioritize? Your hair answers that question before you do. Consider fit, not the expense of clothing, the fit. The garment that belongs on your specific body signals that you know yourself precisely enough to identify what belongs on you, and cared enough to execute it rather than approximate it. Ill-fitting expensive clothing is read neurologically worse than well-fitting inexpensive clothing. The expensive but poorly fitted signal says, wealth without self-awareness, resources without taste, and taste, in the neurological evaluation of the observer, is the closest available proxy for judgment, for the same discrimination you would want applied to complex problems where you can't monitor the execution. This is the architecture of the obsession, not a style checklist, not a morning routine, a standard you hold your physical presentation to with the same gravity a surgeon applies to preparation before a procedure, not because the procedure is uncertain, because consequences are real, precision costs nothing, and the alternative is operating with one hand behind your back while calling it a fair contest. When the image breaks, the convergence Brummell's fall, when it arrived, was total and final. By 1816, his friendship with the Prince of Wales had fractured. A collision of debt, mounting arrogance, and a public remark that has survived every version of his story. At a social gathering in front of the prince, Brummell turned to a mutual acquaintance and asked, with theatrical blandness, "Who is your fat friend?" The moment his social protection dissolved, everything that had kept his position standing went with it. The credit extended to him on the basis of his social authority had no independent foundation. The involuntary deference rooms had extended to him. That automatic response that powerful people couldn't explain but reliably produced, vanished as completely as a shared hallucination at the moment of waking. He fled to France. He died in a lunatic asylum in Caen in 1840, penniless. His mind deteriorated. He spent his final years in collapsing clothing, hosting imaginary dinner parties for guests who existed only in his dissolution, setting invisible places, directing invisible servants, acting out the performance for an audience that had long since ceased to be there. The image had been the entire load-bearing structure. When the image became unsustainable by debt, by exile, by the slow decay of obsession without resources, there was nothing underneath it, no foundation, no accumulated real power that the image had amplified, only the performance itself, running on fumes. This is the darker side of the Machiavellian principle. Appearance without substance beneath it is leverage without ground. Brummell's error was not that he invested obsessively in image. His error was that he used image to borrow authority he never converted into durable foundations. He understood brilliantly how to trigger the automatic human machinery of deference. He never built anything behind the facade that could hold weight when the facade became strained. Machiavelli's counsel in chapter 19 of The Prince is careful and specific. The prince must not merely appear strong. He must appear strong because he has constructed the actual power structures that make the appearance credible under pressure. The appearance is the accelerant. The substance is the fire. Without the fire, the accelerant is just a smell. The obsession with your appearance is not a substitute for the work. It is a force multiplier on the work. Every genuine capability you have built, every real skill you have sharpened, every legitimate credibility you have earned through effort, appearance amplifies it by a documented and measurable factor before you have said a single word. Without the obsession, your real work is invisible until proven. With it, your real work is assumed before it is demonstrated. Brummell built the amplifier without the signal. You must build both. The uncomfortable conclusion of everything the economists measured, everything the psychologists documented, everything the historians recorded, and everything Machiavelli observed with unsentimental clarity across 5 centuries, is this: the world responds to what it perceives before it responds to what is real. This is not an injustice to be corrected. It is hardware to be understood. The people who move through life collecting disproportionate trust, disproportionate credit, disproportionate deference for their ideas, they are not always more brilliant than you. They are not always more worthy. They have simply understood that the brain of every person they encounter runs a visual processing sequence before a logical one. They stopped resenting the sequence and started engineering it. Machiavelli's insight was not that you should lie about who you are. It was that the world will never respond to who you are in the abstract. It can only respond to what it can perceive, and what it can perceive is within your control, entirely, deliberately, from the moment you are visible. The addiction he pointed toward is this: the daily, compulsive, relentless investment in the signal you broadcast before you open your mouth. Not for vanity. Vanity needs to be admired and is therefore dependent. This is for the same reason a general puts on the uniform before entering the field. Not because the uniform makes him dangerous, because the uniform removes, before a single exchange begins, any question in the minds of everyone present about who is in command. Become obsessed with the signal, become addicted to the standard, because in every room you enter, the verdict was already delivered before you arrived. The only question is this: who delivered it? Them, by default, or you, by design. YouTube demonetized this channel, not for misinformation, for information they'd prefer you never had. Advertisers don't fund uncomfortable architecture. They fund comfortable consumers, and this channel has never been interested in producing either. If this reached you, there is a deeper, rawer layer of this work waiting on Patreon. Video essays, psychological frameworks, and audio content that will never survive a public platform. The link is in the description. The ones who find it are already different from the ones who scroll past. Don't be like them.